Alice Springs, located at the border of the Northern Territory and South Australia, is famed for its stunning desert landscapes, especially the World Heritage-listed Uluru. This town, home to 12% of the Northern Territory's population, includes several indigenous communities, which make up 20.3% of the local populace. It serves as the political, commercial, transportation, and cultural hub of the region. Residents frequently travel several hours to the city center for social services or medical care. This year, Alice Springs has repeatedly made headlines due to youth crime. In March, an 18-year-old man died in a car accident involving a stolen vehicle. 3 weeks later, attendees of his funeral caused a disturbance in downtown Alice Springs, leading to the destruction of a well-known pub's glass. Reports indicated that the attendees had come from a community 230 kilometers northeast of Alice Springs, seeking the driver responsible for the accident. In May, the Northern Territory government announced a 2-week curfew for local youths, later extended by a week. After lifting the curfew, a new law was passed, allowing the police minister to declare a 72-hour curfew without government approval in case of serious public order disturbances, with the possibility of extending the curfew for another week. This new law sparked concern among local Indigenous elders and leaders who criticized it as a band-aid solution that fails to address the root causes of youth crime and feared it would worsen racial discrimination against Indigenous people. In July, shortly after the new law took effect, another youth violence incident occurred in Alice Springs. During a 2-day agricultural show that attracted many local residents to the city center, incidents included a brawl involving 80 people, a stabbing, a gas station robbery, and an assault on 4 off-duty police officers. Subsequently, the police minister declared a 72-hour emergency curfew, prohibiting adults and youths from entering the city center between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. unless under special circumstances. After the 3-day curfew, the police minister announced it would not be extended. However, the youth crime issue in Alice Springs has garnered national and international attention, impacting the Northern Territory's tourism industry. Indigenous community leaders call for practical, effective long-term measures to truly address the problem. Youth crime in Alice Springs is a long-standing issue, but this year, a series of violent incidents brought it to the forefront of Australian media, prompting Prime Minister Albanese to visit Alice Springs after the curfew announcement to discuss youth crime with local officials. Despite the Northern Territory government's claims that the curfew aims to reduce crime rates, some local Indigenous residents believe it recalls colonial-era discrimination, exploitation, and oppression by European white ruling classes. Australia's Indigenous history spans tens of thousands of years, but in the 19th century, European colonizers deemed the land terra nullius and seized Indigenous lands for pastoral development, enslaving, massacring, isolating, and exploiting Indigenous people. Various states enacted laws to legitimize the expulsion and isolation of Indigenous people. Curfews for Indigenous people became one such legal measure. In Western Australia, Indigenous curfews date back to 1905. In Alice Springs, Indigenous people were prohibited from entering the city center from sunset to sunrise between 1928 and 1964. Scholars point out that the Northern Territory government effectively suspended the 1992 Anti-Discrimination Act to implement the curfew. The Northern Territory Indigenous Justice Association also fears that Indigenous youths will face targeted enforcement under the curfew. Scholars argue that the curfew will severely impact the homeless. In 2007, the Northern Territory government released the Little Children Are Sacred report, revealing child sexual abuse in remote Indigenous communities. However, the report's authors stressed that solutions require sufficient support and empowerment for Indigenous people to address issues like healthcare and housing within their communities, and opposed government one-size-fits-all interventions, which they believed would hinder community-driven changes. Nonetheless, the Howard-led Liberal federal government announced a 5-year emergency intervention in the Northern Territory in 2007, effectively extended to 2022. Measures included mandatory health checks for children, banning alcohol in remote Indigenous communities, and implementing a government-run income management system limiting personal expenditure to 50%. Apart from crime measures, the emergency intervention included some transitional justice measures, such as leasing agreements under the 1993 Native Title Act to address historical land occupation issues. In 2007, the Labour Party won the federal election, but did not abolish the emergency intervention, merely rebranding the policies. The alcohol ban continued until 2023, affecting over 70 Indigenous communities. The intervention's impact is controversial. Statistics suggest that after its repeal in 2023, Alice Springs saw a 50% increase in break-ins and domestic violence compared to the previous year. Critics argue that the intervention led to discriminatory policing, increased arrests, and detentions of Indigenous people, perpetuating colonial oppression. Indigenous community leaders and advocates have long called for sustainable policies to reduce crime and promote community development post-alcohol ban. However, the government continues to apply temporary fixes. As crime rates rose after lifting the ban, the Northern Territory government announced new alcohol purchase restrictions in early 2023, limiting store hours and purchase quantities. Scholars and Indigenous leaders criticize the government's reliance on bans without substantive measures to address underlying issues like housing shortages and unemployment. Many Indigenous parents in Alice Springs, victims of colonial-era policies, face alcoholism, unemployment, and trauma, leading to youth truancy and crime. During the youth curfew in Alice Springs, Australian media interviewed Indigenous community leaders who stated that the government did not consult them before announcing the curfew. Local youth representatives highlighted successful community-led projects, such as a 24-hour youth service center, which provided a safe place for youths avoiding home, reducing street conflicts. However, these projects often ceased due to various reasons. In 2023, the federal government announced a $250 million investment in the Northern Territory, including $50 million for infrastructure in remote communities, such as sports and basketball facilities, and $30 million for training centers providing vocational training for Indigenous people. Youth crime is not limited to Indigenous communities in the Northern Territory. In Victoria, nearly 20,000 crimes were committed by youths aged 14 to 17 in 2023, a 29.4% increase from 2022, the highest since 2009. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the national youth crime rate rose by 6% year-on-year as of June 2023. Australian Broadcasting Corporation data since 2020 shows rising youth recidivism rates in all states except the Australian Capital Territory and New South Wales. Australia faces a dilemma in addressing youth crime. With rising crime rates, victims and some citizens call for stricter measures, while media reports highlight excessive enforcement and human rights violations in youth correctional institutions, along with discriminatory policing against non-white youths. The government and communities continue to seek solutions to address the root causes of youth crime.